This is the YouTube version of the Hidden Experience audio podcast. This show is hosted by Mike Cleland, and that's me, and it is available on most of the popular podcast platforms. Just search out Hidden Experience Audio. And if you want to support the show, you can find it on Patreon, as well as Buy Me a Coffee. This YouTube version has ads, but the audio version is always ad-free. And you can also join my YouTube channel here. And now the show. Audio conversation with Christopher Knowles, recorded Sunday, July 14th, 2024. I went back and I counted up that I have done 6 previous interviews with Chris. This would be our 7th interview. 5 of them were on my old incarnation of the Hidden Experience podcast, and one of them was on Whitley Strieber's The Unseen. All of those are available and easy to find. Now, I will say, Chris is a good friend of mine, and we chat often, not often enough, and this guy, how to say this? This guy is on fire with this ability to tap into the sort of pop culture mythos that seems to swim around us and that seems to impart a sort of mystical oracle's voice. And Chris is exceptionally skilled at picking up on that elusive voice. He runs a blog called The Secret Sun, and I highly recommend it. It can get pretty strange, and I'm all for that. And he does this thing that he refers to as psychoanalyzing popular culture. And it is 2 things. It's an insight into the workings of his mind. And the second thing would be it is just plain, monumentally fun to dig through the research he has done and the mammoth amount of output that he has on his site. Now, I'm going to read something, and this is something I lifted from his blog back in 2009, and this was at the incarnation of my blog, getting on 15 years ago. This is on the sidebar, and it has been on the sidebar of my blog since its inception. And here's what Chris says. Keep a dream log and a sync log, starting today. Keep track of your dreams and the synchronicities you observe or experience. And then see if by the end of the year, those 2 logs haven't become one. Now, in essence, that's exactly what I did. I did it on my blog. I shared my dreams and my synchronicities publicly. I wrestled with what they might mean, and this led to a podcast, and that led to eventually 4 big fat books on owls, UFOs, and synchronicities. I should also add that during that chapter of my life, when I was blogging heavily in those years, I was drowning in synchronicities. And we talk about that in the show. I was suffering, and in a very real way, I thought I was going insane. And I'm not mincing words. I really mean that. And both Chris and I talk about that level of abandonment and madness in our conversation. For the subject of this interview, we focus on his newest book, which is titled The Secret Sun Synchromystic Handbook. And this is a little book, and it has synchromystic right in the cover, and synchromystic is a word I love, and it can also be used in synchromystism and synchromystical. This interview rolls on for a little over an hour and a half, and we cover a lot, so let's just jump right into it. Here goes. Please enjoy. Chris, I want to thank you so much for saying yes to this interview. It means a lot to me.
Oh, well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Mike, about anything. I'm always ready to talk to my boy Mike Cleland, I'll tell you that much.
Okay, so here we're talking about your new book, which is a handbook. You just held it up for me. I only have a digital copy, and I looked up the size, and I was like, right on. It's like a pocketbook. When I lived in New York City, I always had a paperback book in my back pocket. There was just times you had to wait in line at the bank, or you had to sit and wait at the subway, and everyone had a book in New York City at that time. I think that's all gone now.
Yeah, we got to bring that back. Digital media is destroying everybody's brains. Got to get back to books, get back to attention spans, get back to, more than 30 seconds worth of focus. And it's all of us, I have to say. I mean, we're all guilty of it. We're all, our brains have all been scrambled by the algorithms. And I'm like, no, I want to get back to like ink and paper and highlighters, all my books, with this little baby here. Just, it really helps focus the mind. If anybody's interested in that, when you highlight, you're much more engaged in the reading. But yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. As a matter of fact, I was at the used bookstore yesterday and I got a couple of old Spencer paperbacks. So that was exciting. Because I remember you asked me about this. Robert B. Parker, yeah. I remember you asking me about that when we were talking about He Will Live Up in the Sky. It's like, did you read a lot of hard-boiled detective stuff? And it's like, yeah, pretty much 90% of my reading, or at least my fiction reading, yeah.
The books that were in my back pocket were all Chandler. I just was obsessed with Chandler, and I tried to read some of the peripheral stuff, and it never had the meat and the sort of beauty of Chandler for me.
Yeah, well, Robert B. Parker, I remember, did a book that was like an expansion of like a outline that Chandler had written.
Poodle Springs.
Yes. Was that? I think that was made into a movie too.
It was made for TV movie, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't very good. It wasn't Chandler, and that was a point when Parker was really just phoning it in. But his stuff in the 70s and early 80s is phenomenal. I don't know how many people are interested in that kind of thing, but yeah, all my favorite fiction writers are detective procedural writers. So take that for what it's worth.
Well, He Will Live Up in the Sky was a detective book. I mean, it was straight up a detective book. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I love it, man. It's like, that's how my brain works. I love whodunits and puzzles and twists and
snappy dialogue and
snappy dialogue. Yeah,
what the women are wearing when they walk in the room. Yeah. So.
Oh yeah. I really have to admit that a lot of my style really comes from Robert B. Parker's early stuff, and plus he was writing about Boston and so on. And then he did that series with Robert Urich, Spencer for Hire. Do you remember that back in the 80s? And Avery Brooks, Captain Cisco, the emissary of the Nine, yes, or of the Prophets. I'm sorry, yeah. So, good stuff.
Okay, let's bring it back to your pocketbook, and let me ask the question. So I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway for the listeners. Why did you write this book?
It's something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. And a lot of it is because I see a lot of people trying to do synchromysticism and they just can't master it. They just can't get the hang of it. And I wanted to spell it out in ways that people could understand and that, oddly enough, are very rational and evidence-based. I know that sounds kind of paradoxical to some people, but I really wanted to show that if you really approach this rigorously and focus on the evidence, that you can really blow your mind open. And the other reason, too, I mean, this is going to sound strange, but it's like I've seen people go nuts doing synchromysticism.
I've gone nuts. I've gone nuts doing synchromysticism, so I got that under my belt. So there, keep going.
Yes, so I really wanted to do something that could help people stay sane while they're doing the work. So there you go.
I wrote a blog post back in 2011, I think, might have been 2010, and it was called The Evolutionary Triad. And I was comparing and contrasting 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, I remember that. That was great.
Yeah, I was, what I was doing? I was like, everyone else was doing it. I was like, yeah, Christopher Knowles, does this shit. Like, I should give it a try. So I just said, I got this kind of idea. Like, look, 2001 and Planet of the Apes kind of overlap. They were both from 1968. They both had ape makeup in it. There's both kind of this evolutionary theme in it. And I got lost for like 10 days. Like I was so obsessed for 10 days, and the weirdest shit was like bubbling up. And it was just, there was a couple points when I was just like, well, if I get a connection to this, then I'll eat my hat. And then like, it felt like 5 minutes later, I clicked on something and it was like, oh God, I could go into this in great detail, but we've talked about this before ages ago. And it actually got printed. I actually sent you the raw file. So all you had to do is upload the URL information, not the URL. What is it called? The raw text. So you got all of the pictures and stuff, and that all went on the Secret Sun back in 2011 at some point.
Yeah, you sent me the HTML code. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was actually the most popular post on my blog ever. That evolutionary triad thing. And I was like, I'm never doing this again. I'm never going to pull the strings like I pulled them like there. That was just wasn't worth it. The madness I succumbed to, like, wasn't enough to get some hits on a stupid blog. So
welcome to my life, brother. Welcome to my life.
I know. I was going to say, I was like, now I know why Chris Knowles is like he is sometimes. Yeah. So anyway, so keep going. I can't remember. I guess I asked you why you wrote the book, and then we got sidetracked on this.
No, so it really was to let people have a way to approach this stuff rigorously. I don't want to necessarily say scientifically, even though it kind of is, but I wanted to give people a very solid primer on how to approach this phenomenon, and also a number of warnings too, and do's and don'ts and so on. I really do believe that if people read this book and follow what's in it, they can have experiences like what you were talking about without, losing it. Because believe me, I know all about that all too well. I mean, you've seen some of the epic things that I've done on the Secret Sun. I being up all night for days, the stack of books that I'd like read one and just throw in a pile and read it and then throw in a pile. And it's like just going through just absolute deluge of information to try and make sense of all this stuff. But, the end result is important because I think people need to change their concept, their model, the way they model reality. Model their reality that life is just a string of disconnected events and symbolism and so on. It doesn't add up to anything. And people, a lot of people live in this cloud, this sort of, I think it's almost like a kind of zombification. And I want people to, get in touch with what I call the signal. That the signal is out there and it's constantly broadcasting. And if you tune into it, you can enlarge your viewpoint. I mean, you're a mountain guy, so it's kind of similar to like standing at the bottom of a mountain and looking up, as opposed to standing at the top of a mountain and looking down. If that makes sense. Oh
yeah.
Okay, and it's just it gives people a different experience of reality, and that's really what I'm talking about, is changing your experience of reality, changing the way you see things, the way you process information. It really helps in many ways to unplug you from all the madness, let's just say, that's so endemic on the internet, all the conflicts and just people just constantly fighting for stupid reasons and attacking people and going after people and so on. I think that's just because they're stuck. This is where I start to use a lot of new age terminology, so bear with me, but they're stuck in like a lower vibrational level or a lower vibrational field. It's like they're imprisoned in that. And that makes you bored, first of all. It makes you bitter. It makes you angry, and it makes you paranoid. And if you can rise above that, and it's a lot harder than it sounds, believe me, but once you start to rise above that, you start to have a different viewpoint. And like I said, it's the difference between standing at the bottom of a mountain and standing at the top. You know, it's like your whole field of vision is renewed, I think is a good word for it.
I was at a conference. This was before I wrote any of the books or anything like that. And I was going to UFO conferences for very personal reasons. And I found them really rewarding, mostly just because I could talk to people and not filter myself and listen to people and hear stories that I could resonate so strongly with. But someone said, hey, you've been, kind of digging into your own experiences and, and how's it going for you? And there's that, he said, guy asked me a really good question. He said, how's your life changed since you started digging into this stuff? And I had to think. And the answer, which was honest, was I now live in a magical universe.
Yes. Re-enchantment, sir. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I talk about that all the time.
Re-enchantment, yeah.
It's sort of Max Weber back in 1890s talking about the disenchantment process in the West and how a lot of this scientific and quasi-scientific kind of knowledge that was becoming so prominent created the sense of disenchantment. And I just think, you need to re-enchant yourself using a more solid foundation. You need to re-enchant your experience of life based on a more solid and I don't want to say necessarily provable because you get into the weeds of subjectivity there, but something where you can say, well, there's a reason I think this way, and here it is all laid out. Like here's all my data, here's all my evidence, rather than just like, oh, well, I believe in the Pleiadian star cluster of people and the blue chickens and whatever. I mean, just a lot of, I mean, you know what I'm talking about. You see those people.
Oh, yeah.
You know how it is when you start talking about like, oh, yeah, I'm into UFOs and stuff. And it's like, oh, well, what do you think of the blue chickens?
Or yeah. I'm glad David Wilcock has kind of been dethroned because that came up a lot for a while.
Yeah, I saw his book in the used bookstore yesterday. But I remember when that Corey Good guy came out, I was just like, who actually believes this? Yeah, I think you and I had conversations about that. What was that, like 2007, 2008? It was a long time ago.
It was more like 2012 to 2016 or so, yeah.
Yeah, whatever. I mean,
yeah.
a long time ago. And I just was like, this is why people laugh at this stuff. This is why people make fun of people who take things like UFOs seriously, because of people like this. But what are you going to do? I mean, we did a big live stream on my Patreon on the Space Brother cults. And I got to tell you something. A lot of those groups were rather nefarious. They all had like very sketchy authoritarian political agendas, buried in or embedded into them, I guess is a better term. So, and the problem is that that's when you don't base your woo, let's just say your woo-woo, on some kind of evidence that people can evaluate. That's when you end up that way. So
yeah. How did our ancestors deal with the phenomena we call synchronicity?
They basically built religions around it, for lack of a better term. I mean, this was the signs and wonders. This was the interface with the other, whatever you choose to regard the other as. I think synchronicity played a huge part in it. I really do. And there was a belief in, say, the Greco-Roman world that when you experienced synchronicity, that meant you were in the presence of Hermes, Mercury. Whatever you choose to name him, it's all the same kind of thing.
The messenger.
Yeah, the messenger. That when you started to experience synchronicity, you were in that presence. In that presence, I think you see a lot of it in the Bible. Certainly, I think it's almost universal. I really do. Unfortunately, what happens is that the mythologizing process sort of takes over, and you start to have all these grand myths sort of painted over the essence. But one of the things, so here's the thing, when you talk about synchronicity, I started to believe when I was really started doing synchromystic work seriously, that the ancient gods and goddesses sort of came about, or at least the recognition of them came about, because people started to notice that when you use this sort of symbolism, or you pray to this certain figure, or, however you choose to interface with it, that massive, major kind of synchronicities resulted from that. And people just over time, started to call these particular figures certain names. And this might be a little later than like sort of the animistic gods that were obviously based on processes of nature. A little later, maybe more like the mystery cult era, say in, Hellenistic Greece and so on. But I think that it's just hard baked into it. It really is. And it's, if you're a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, you say, it's a sign from God. And in the ancient world, I think that was a sign from Hermes. So it's take your pick,
It's a sign from the universe. Yeah, that's a synonym too. Yeah,
exactly. It's interesting too. This whole thing, like the universe is indifferent to us. Like the universe just doesn't care.
Oh, I disagree.
And it's just like, look where you're living. You're living in the champagne room of the universe. As far as we know, this is as good as it gets. Why are you complaining? We live in a paradise. It's just we haven't yet outgrown our animalistic urges and our animalistic instincts that are sort of married to our, it's like the monkey and the alien, right? It's like we haven't yet learned to overcome that animalistic need for survival and dominance and start to tune in more with higher mind. It's like a lot of us are still stuck in lower mind, no matter how we dress it up. So
we're being told to be stuck in that lower mind by the general populace. Yeah. Yeah.
The algorithms. Yes. The algorithms, the demon's head rhythms where, this is why I really, again, why we really got to get back to ink and paper, and especially older books. I want people to start really digging into their libraries and used bookstores and book swaps and rummage sales and all that good kind of stuff, and just start finding like things that or at least haven't been ruined by the corporate globalistic process, and is just filled with solid information and true honest expression.
Hey, define synchromysticism.
Well, there are a number of definitions that I use, but if it really came down to brass tacks, I always say synchromystism is the art of using the tools of dream analysis on so-called reality. Okay?
Yeah.
So, I've always had, I don't know if we've discussed this or whatever, but I've always had like super, super vivid dreams. And I had a lot of like super vivid nightmares when I was younger too. And I got into dream analysis, and at first I'd use all the books, and then I was like, I don't know. And then I fell into the whole idea of free associative interpretation. And the thinking behind that is that you are the author of your dreams. Okay, you are the artist. So the meanings and the interpretations belong to you. So just start letting it flow. What does this mean to me? What is my experience with this? But we apply that to our collective reality, our collective consciousness. Let's just say, and when you do that, you have to transcend the personal and start to get into the collective. So just as an example, say I have a particular dream that, I go to a lake and I see, I don't know, like a sea monster or something, or a plane crashes into a mountain while I'm driving on the highway, something of that nature. I have to start to think like, well, what does that mean to me? Like, was I into sea monster stories when I was a kid? Was I into Loch Ness or whatever? Do I have a fear of flying? So on and so forth. But when it starts to become a question of interpreting collective experience, that's when you have to start looking at what do these things mean collectively? What do these things mean to all of us, if you understand my meaning there? And that's where I think synchromysticism comes in handy, but it also requires you to do a lot of background work, learning what these symbols mean, symbol systems, religions, films, culture, major events in history. You have to have I think you have to have at least a passing familiarity with all these things. And the more you understand these things, these collective symbol systems, the more you understand them and the more you're able to draw on them for your interpretation, I think the better your work is going to be.
I have been doing UFO research, it feels like full time, for 15 years. And at a certain point along the way, I started using that model, treating UFO cases as if they were dreams. And I'm not doing MUFON type UFO research where somebody sees a dot in the sky flying from east to west and they fill out a form on the MUFON website. I'm talking to people who have had UFO experiences coinciding with owl experiences, so they're already like mythically charged on some level. But it has been such a rewarding tool to use the dream language model of these very trippy experiences that people will tell.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes they're at the point of, they're coming to me for answers. I don't have good answers. What I can say mostly is they're not alone, but I will often say, treat your experience as a dream. It's a very personal thing. It's hard for me as an outsider to say what your dream might mean, but it's been so helpful for me to take two steps back from a very complex phenomena and then to be able to make forward progress in an avenue that most other researchers aren't going there, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And I think it's the best way to approach it, to be honest with you. I hate when people start use the consciousness word. It's hard to get around, but it's so abused. It's driven me nuts for.
Did I say consciousness?
No, you did not. You did not.
Okay, good, because I agree. It's a tough word. Yeah.
But I'm just trying to expand on what you're saying. But the thing that I'm trying to say is that there's some relation, and this is preaching to the choir, I'm sure, but there's some relation between our internal realities and these phenomena and events. The problem that I start to have, though, is that, it gets very mushy and very nebulous, I think would be the term, when you start bringing in ideas like consciousness, because we are looking at external realities that can be recorded in various ways, film, video, radar, so on and so forth, multiple witnesses and so on. So I think that if we start to get too mushy and too hippy-dippy about it, you lose the plot. It has to be in that liminal space between our inner reality and an observable and measurable external reality. But that's where all the excitement is. That's where all the things that happen. In my view, things stay in the external world, and they're just almost like this parade of events. And then your dreams and your thoughts and everything like that, it becomes very difficult for people to relate to. But when you start to look at the interface, particularly with prophetic dreams and so on and so forth, and you start to look at these experiences that break down that wall between dream and what we call objective reality, that's the sweet spot for me, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. My second book, Stories from the Messengers, the subtitles was going to be Owls, Synchronicity, and Consciousness. Like, that was my working title. And then I was like, I don't even know what consciousness means. Like, I can't, like what does consciousness mean? I can't even define it. So I changed the subtitle to A Deeper Reality, and that feels like a better synonym for what I wanted consciousness to mean. You know, like I'm trying to explore that deeper reality. And
we need better vocabulary.
We should make words up. Synchromystism. We made that word up, let's make some words up.
Well, as I've been saying, I was doing synchromysticism a long time before I ever heard the term. Definitely in the early 90s. And the more I think about it, back into the 80s, like the mid 80s. So it's something that's always been with me. I just didn't know that it had a name. And I didn't know it had a name until like 2005, 2006 or so. And then I was like, oh, that's what I'm into. That's what I do.
It's a great term. It's a great word, synchromysticism. Yeah.
Yes. There's a bit of controversy about who coined the term. Some people say that Goro Adachi did, and some people credit Jake Kotze and so on. And then Wikipedia says it's a form of chaos magic, which I totally disagree with.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's how those people think. It's like something has to be put into a pigeonhole that they have already explained away. It has to be put in the same category with all the things that they've killed, basically, and suck the meaning out of, or otherwise you're not legitimate. Or more accurately, I think you scare them. Things that are living and things that are happening and things that are alive tend to scare the people who see themselves as sort of the archivists, let's just say, of human experience.
Yeah, you were allowed to have a mystical experience 2,000 years ago. You're not allowed to have it now. Yeah.
Well, it depends where you are. It depends what part of the world you're in. I think that's going to change. We're going to revert to the mean. We're going to revert to the default position. In order to keep that whole kind of mindset up where, we just live in this dead, empty, mechanistic world, it takes a lot of policing, self-policing and external policing, let's just say, of your thoughts and words and so on. But without that, when you take away that level, when you take away that authority, people revert to things like synchromysticism because it makes sense and everybody experiences it. So,
yeah. Hey, have you got the book in front of you there?
I sure do.
Hey, turn to page 8, and there's 3 bulleted points that I highlighted in my digital version, and I would love you to read those 3 bulleted points.
Okay, page 8. Okay, page 8. All right, here we go. What do you want me to read, brother?
The bulleted points.
Oh, so that's page 9.
Oh, is it page 9? Forgive me.
Yes,
okay.
sir. Yes, sir. The classic example of synchronicity is when someone thinks about a friend or relative they haven't talked to in a while, and then that person suddenly phones them. Yet that could describe precognition just as much as an actual synchronicity. And with those kind of synchronicities, to be honest with you, I start to lean much more heavily in terms of precognition or psi.
And that's a mystical event too, precognition and psi.
Yes.
So that's interesting too. Yeah, keep going.
A more proper sync would be when someone you haven't thought of for a while calls and tells you that your aunt died and left you her entire estate in her will. The significance here is what elevates a sync from a mere coincidence or an example of psi. But a synchromystic sync would be if that person called, told you your aunt died, and left you her estate, and then informed you that workers discovered an occult library and an altar belonging to an ancient alien cult in the basement. That's the highest level.
That's a home run. Yeah, that's out of the park.
Yeah, that's extremely significant and symbolically supercharged is the term I like to use.
And this is what shows up in the OWL research sometimes, not every case, but wow, do I get these supercharged accounts that people come to me with. And I've had these kind of supercharged events in my own life. And I don't know how to say it. You got to pull on that thread. You got to pull on that thread.
Well, let me give you an example just of a recent event that we had. So we went to my friend's house, or my wife and I's mutual friend's house last weekend. And my wife and my friend Laura were sort of commiserating because she had a number of cats die in a very short cluster. And we experienced the same thing a couple of years ago. So we were kind of talking about that. And my wife said something to the effect of like, well, I'm ready for a kitten, but it's going to come to me. I'm going to receive it. It's going to be the right one that's going to come to me, and I won't expect it. That kind of thing. The very next day, in her Facebook group, one of my daughter's friend's mother posted these heartbreaking pictures of this tiny little kitten that was scratching at her back door because it was starving to death. And it was showing the signs of what's called failing kitten syndrome. Mm-hmm. So it had clearly been out there for a while without food or water, and how it survived all the predators around here, coyotes, raccoons, foxes, hawks, owls, right?
Yeah, I was waiting for that.
Yeah, is kind of miraculous to me. But that was the very next day. So, and then she's in our house now, and she's recovering very, very rapidly. But she's going to be a real terror. We can just tell it. She's going to be one of those kind of cats. But that whole spirit and spunk that she had, it was what kept her alive. When I think, by all rights, she probably should have been dead. But that was the next day. That's that supercharged synchronicity for you right there. So you got to love it.
Yeah. So, and I know the answer to this. I know what you're going to say, but I got to ask it. Do you think we can ever truly understand these synchronous events and their source?
The source, no. I don't know. It's the other. It's the other side of the veil, so to speak. And what I've really come to believe personally is that, I start to understand faith now. Faith to me was always just believing in something that you didn't see. That's sort of the vernacular description of it. But now I start to understand, faith is just letting go of the need to explain things that you've experienced over and over again in some ways. I've experienced synchronicities almost my entire life, as far back as I can remember. And I don't try to explain them anymore. I don't try to put some sort of label and tell you some pseudo-mystical, pseudo-scientific or whatever description or explanation. It's just it is. And I just let it be is. I just let it happen. And I don't try to explain it. I mean, one of the things I've talked about is I had sort of a synchromistic mentor back in the 90s, so to speak, again, before the term was coined, and he lost his mind. And he kind of lost his mind because he started to see all these synchronicities as the work of extra dimensional entities that are basically gods that are orchestrating all these synchronicities and don't necessarily have our best intentions in mind. And I think that's when you start to lose it. The thing that I've come to say is don't try to combine your science and your mysticism, because you just end up with bad science and bad mysticism. What Stephen Jay Gould called the non-overlapping magisteria. And if you let that happen, it's a much saner and healthier approach to the material than trying to concoct basically what boiled down to fantasies. That's when you end up with blue chickens and so on,
Yeah, and I am so much more at peace. There was a point somewhere in all this when I figured like, oh yeah, this UFO and owl thing, I'll figure this out, and I'll I'll write it up as an essay and I'll be done with it. And that was like 15 years ago. And it remains a powerful mystery even now. But there was a point when I was searching for an answer. And somewhere along the line, I was like, "Oh, this ain't gonna work. Like, don't have the answer as the goal. I guess the what I have as the goal in a way is the power of the story, like a beautiful story, a mythic story that emerges from someone's.
That's enough.
That's plenty.
That's enough. Yeah.
And I think that we tap into that in a way where the answer is up for debate. You know, the mythic feeling you get in your soul is individual, and everyone can feel that and everyone can sense that. And so, so I just gave up, and I have been much more at peace since I stopped looking for an answer and have been content. I've been content with the power of the stories. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the effects of experience to me and actually doing the work. You cycle through all the, I would say even childish need to name and claim, as I call it, to name and claim these things. Because when you try to define these things or explain these things, what you're actually trying to do is control them. And one thing that I believe is the difference between mysticism and magic is that mysticism, as I define it, is like it controls you and you let it because you trust it. And magic is like you're trying to control it, you're trying to dominate it, you're trying to get these things to obey you and obey your rather specious and vulgar needs, if that makes sense. Just mysticism to me, again, it's like let go, let it happen, and ride those waves. You know, I always use the ocean. People get so sick of me talking about the ocean, but you know, having grown up on the ocean, that's my favorite metaphor because that's where I learned. You know, how to survive in the ocean without drowning is. Yeah, that's like your top priority when you spend a lot of time in it, like I did when I was a kid. So.
Well, the ocean is a metaphor for the unconscious. It's a metaphor for the shadow realm and everything. Yeah. So going deep into the ocean and swimming in the ocean and being comfortable swimming and surrendering to yourself to the ocean is. So I dropped out of life somewhere in the mid 80s and became a ski bum, and I was going to do it for one winter and ended up for 25 winters. But so I was giving myself over to water. I mean, snow is water. Right. So you're a ski bum, you want to ski, your life is skiing, and you have to, especially in the backcountry where you're dealing with like the groomers aren't grooming the terrain for you. You have to give yourself over to the conditions that basically God set down during the last snowstorm. And so, you know, whether the snow's a little crunchy, whether the snow's a little soft, whether but you have to give yourself over and surrender to gravity in that sense. And
yes,
if you go too slow, it doesn't work. Like you got to give yourself over to gravity and allow the skis to do their magic. It's like the analogy I would say is like the plane can't take off from the runway unless it's kind of going fast. You know, so you got to, in order to really surrender, sometimes you got to get up to speed that's appropriate for truly surrendering.
Well, you know, you said something when we talked a while ago, and I'm not exactly sure when, but you were talking about how being out in the wild and doing your wilderness training and so on, you realize just how little you need.
Oh, yeah.
You know, how little is just, is necessary. And just how we just clutter our lives and our possessions possess us and so on. And I that principle helps me in a lot of ways because I start to understand, like, I think I don't want to say it's adolescent, but it's kind of the purview of the young man to want to discover these sort of more etheric or subtle currents in our reality and try to master them and try to put them to work for us. And after a while, I think you outgrow that. You know, you outgrow that need because you realize that it's all so much bigger than you. And, you know, I mean, you understand that, of course, I mean, obviously skiing and being out in the wild and so on. When you realize that you're part of something bigger, I think there's a liberational effect. Is that a word? Liberational?
It's a great word. We make it up. Yeah, I'm all for that. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's something very liberating about letting go of these things. And once you start to do that, I think that's when the real magic starts to happen, you know, small m magic. You know, for instance, I remember, unfortunately, my dog passed away. When I was in recovery, my dog, Linda, my collie, big, beautiful collie, I called her my psychopomp because we'd go on these huge walks, often at night. And I started to just tune back in to the fact that I lived in like a world that's alive, a world that is not only alive but is conscious, you know, that and everything is vibrating and everything has some sense of consciousness, whether it's grass or trees or, you know, clearly all insects and animals. And, you know, you start to realize that you're not walking around in this void. You're walking around in a biosphere. You know, you're walking around in a living, breathing, conscious environment. And I think that that's another thing, as strange as this might sound, but it's another thing that I think synchronicity or synchromysticism more accurately can kind of help you get your fingers on, so to speak.
Yeah. So while you were talking, I went and grabbed a copy of my book, The Messengers. Now, I will say that this book, more than any of my other books, was written in a synchronistic cloud that I just can't even define. It was so powerful. And it was also a sort of therapeutic book. Like I started this book tense and confused, and that sort of reflected how I was as a person. And the multi-year process to get this book completed really calmed me down in a lot of ways. And I was struggling with a very complex set of ideas, like why are owls connected to this UFO thing and why are UFOs connected to owls? But let me read the final line of the book before this is actually, it's not truly the final line because there's a conclusion afterwards, but I'll read the final paragraph. I'll also say that all these experiences, or maybe the intelligence behind them, have conspired to make me write this book. That's a bold thing to say, but that's how it feels. I have tried to let go and allow a deeper story to emerge. Like sleeping under the stars on a desert night, this book has been an act of surrendering. I had to let go to write that book.
It takes a lot of confidence and a lot of experience to learn how to do that, I think.
Or some madness. How's that for you? Add that to the mix too, yeah.
Well, I think it goes against our instincts, particularly when we're dealing with things that we can't quantify or understand. So learning to do that, what you've described there, is, to me, it's a hallmark, like I said, of maturity and experience. And it takes a lot of suffering to get there, and it takes a lot of trial and error to get there. But once you get there, like I said before, it's very liberating, very liberating.
Yeah. Hey, I'm going to change. I just want to say, you titled one subchapter, "Careful with That Algorithm, Eugene." I think that's going to go over the heads of a lot of people. It didn't go over my head, let me tell you. Wow, I am like generationally, I was right there with you. So this is Mike chiming in during the editing. Hey, I got to explain something. That reference is to a song, a Pink Floyd song titled "Careful with That Axe, Eugene." And this rather obscure song is from 1968. And this is what Chris was referencing, and this is what I laughed at when I turned the page and saw that subheader, which was "Careful with That Algorithm, Eugene." Okay, now back to the interview. But yeah, I appreciate you putting that kind of playful stuff. That felt very much like it was straight out of your blog.
Yeah.
And the book is written in a really playful, conversational, I don't even know if we're hip anymore. I think we've passed the line where we don't qualify as hip, you or I, in any way, shape, or form anymore. But we are capable of tapping into those kind of pop culture essences, even though some of them might be a little tipping into history at this point rather than present day pop culture.
Well, it's just my weird sense of humor, I guess.
And I'm right there. I got it. I have, yeah. So,
but there's a serious point behind that, and is that when you're doing synchronistic work, the thing I say is like, don't use safe searches. Safe searches are cheating, and synchronicity doesn't like that. When you work with synchronicity, you really start to understand that whether it is an intelligence itself or is the manifestation of an intelligence, that there is an intelligence at work that will communicate with you, that will interact with you. And that's where I think a lot of people start to lose it. And I'm just like, well, just, relax, just let it happen. It is what it is. You got to get past that. But I think that algorithms and, your social media feeds and so on, I think have a tremendous distorting effect. And that's why, like I said, get back to tangibility, physical media or physical experience, just physicality. One thing that I've said, many times in the past few years is that, I really had kind of a Gnostic mindset when I was really ill and I was, really drug dependent. And one of it is that if anybody's dealt with chronic pain, you're basically always in a crouch. You're always just trying to get through the day. You're always just playing defense, so to speak. And that really affected my worldview. I started to see the world as hostile and alien because I just felt like it was attacking me. I didn't realize that a lot of it was like this stupid cocktail of drugs was just frying my brain circuits. But again, getting back to nature, getting outside, getting out there with Linda and experiencing that trees are alive, that trees have consciousness, that trees have personalities, It's kind of a strange thing, You kind of have to just roll with it. But this is something that I've talked about for a long time, is that when you realize that you're in a spiritual supermarket, so to speak, or Grand Central Station of the spirit world, you don't feel the need to impose yourself or be imposed upon. It's just like, just chill out, just hang out. It's kind of like you and the owls or you and nature. You know what I'm talking about. You just chill out, just let things happen, relax, and enjoy the experience. That to me comes with, I think, hard-won knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, grab your book.
Okay.
And read. There's a line from page 54.
Okay, give me a second here. All right, here. Yes, go ahead.
And the first line is, if it's real.
Yes. If it's real, it'll be bigger than you. If it's real, it will be beyond your present frame of reference. If it's real, it's going to call all of your cherished concepts of reality into question. You need to realize that you're going to be finding yourself in the deep end, and maybe more often than not. So learn to swim.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that really felt like I could tap into that exactly here. And then that follows up on page 55. It begins with, remember that synchronicity.
Oh, remember that synchronicity is always testing us, always poking and prodding and withholding the keys to the puzzles. It's all part of the process. Be brave and have the faith to wait for the right answer.
The line that struck me from there, it is withholding the keys to the puzzle. I feel like that is like I'm going to go back to the detective story analogy. I think the reason we love detective stories, sometimes it doesn't matter at the end of a detective story, like who did the murder, right? It doesn't matter. It's the joy of the search. It's the joy.
Chase is better than the catch, as they say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that withholding the keys to the puzzle. The puzzle is reality itself in a way, or our involvement with reality itself. So it is withholding those keys. So we always stay in this place of wonder, or this place of awe, let's say, rather than a place of, like the trail goes on and on and on. The road goes on forever.
It's the ride, like Bill Hicks says, it's just a ride. We're on a ride. Enjoy it, enjoy your little time here. Make the most of it and get to know the lay of the land, so to speak. Too many people are just hiding away behind their devices. You go to concerts now and people are watching the concert through their phones. It's not being in the moment. It's all about, how can I present this on social media? And when you and I were growing up, how many pictures are there of you from when you were, like, say, in your teenage years? Probably not a lot. There aren't a lot of me. Because first of all, I didn't like people taking pictures of me for some reason.
I was the third child, so I got the fewest pictures for sure. Yeah. So
yes. So it's just like we didn't think that way. We didn't think that every experience we had needed to be recorded for posterity. It was more about, like, how can I really experience this? How can I really just fill up with the grandeur of just being alive? How do I do that?
Live in the now.
Live in the now. But it's almost transcending that. I remember back in the 80s, I got really into Zen. And I was reading a lot of books on Zen, Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki and people like that. Really into it, really fascinated by it. And it really taught me in many ways to let go of, but like I said, naming and claiming, but even to let go of, like, letting go of naming and claiming, and then to let go of letting go of naming and claiming. It's like transcend all these conceptual frameworks that you impose upon your existence and exist, just feel it, feel the rush of it. And I think that that's something that gets lost when we're all just so imprisoned by our devices.
What do you want to solve with this book? What do you want to happen for the people who read this book and use this book?
I don't know if I want to solve anything particularly, but I want people to engage. Metaphorically, I want people to dive into the deep end and learn to swim. Get out of the kiddie pool and go into the deep end. That's where all the action is. And the kiddie pool is our preconceptions and our filtered realities. Get into the essence of it. Because it's almost like a strange paradox, because once you've done synchromysticism and you've done a lot of it, it becomes like an automatic process for you. So when you're going around experiencing life, the part of your brain is always running all these calculations. It's always processing and evaluating what you're experiencing. And to me, I think that deepens the experience. You should not let the processing and the evaluation and all those kind of things overshadow your lived experience. It's almost like you should reverse that equation. But you kind of need to do both. You're probably familiar with, like, what was it called? First Earth Army, back in this, you know about that, right? The whole...
No.
Did you see the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats?
Sure.
That was kind of, based on that. But there's something that really struck me. There's a line in there that really struck me that I've cited many times before, because I feel there's something like fundamental at work there. So the George Clooney character is talking to the Ewan McGregor character. And if you've seen the original documentary it's based on, it's very funny how it all plays out. But they meet in this like hotel lounge in Kuwait. and they're sort of talking. I think they're up by the pool, and George Clooney character says to Ewan McGregor, like, okay, what color were the chairs in that room you were just in? And he says, I don't know. I don't remember. And it's like, you were in that room for an hour and a half. You didn't notice what color the chairs were, And I think that's like so important, because when you start to notice just how rich and alive your experiences are, it just changes everything. It just changes. And that's when you start to really, I don't want to say evolve because I hate that word, but you really start to move towards the mystical.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, just before I called you up, I sent you an image of my bedroom door. What's your sense of like this, like my bedroom door, like the door on my bedroom, like here in this place I'm living at?
I would just, like, my first thought was like, of course it is. Like, how could it be anything else? You'll have to post that with the podcast, in the show notes, as they say.
Yeah, yeah. So just explain what you see in it. I know what I see in it.
I see a lot of little gray dudes, big eyes, sort of embedded into the wood grain, so to speak.
So what I'm seeing in it is there's two aliens, gray aliens with the big eyes.
I saw more than that. Really? Just two?
Well, and then above them are two owls with big eyes floating above them.
Okay, see, that's funny because that shows you how our expectations sort of color our perceptions. I did not notice the owls. I noticed the aliens, but now it's just like even more so. Even more so. It's just like, of course, this is his door, and not only his door, but his bedroom door. It's like, of course, how could it be anything else?
And the door. I mean, what symbolism is there? I mean, that's the door. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey, we've been going for about an hour. How are you holding up?
I'm holding up pretty good.
Great. So I want to turn back to the book a little bit more. So leading up to this, I listened to a wonderful interview you did with Gordon White on Rune Soup, where you talked about this book. And you talked about alchemy a little bit in there. And alchemy to me is this mystery. And I just watched a 4-part documentary called Young on Alchemy. And I think each episode is about a half hour long. And it's kind of an odd documentary. It felt like the filmmakers didn't really know quite what they were dealing with in a way, and were kind of overwhelmed. But it had a lot of, it was basically a documentary about Carl Jung's library of alchemical books from, these are like grimoires from like 1509 and stuff like this. These are like ancient books. And he would, with each book, he had a companion notebook that was fat. And with his tiny, beautiful handwriting, he wrote and tried to analyze what this book meant. And these Jungian scholars were trying to make sense of Jung's exploration into these alchemical books. And they basically said that Jung never quite cracked it.
No.
And it was like anything that deals with Carl Jung, I find in some ways is almost impenetrable to me, because he was just
arcane. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was at the same time, it was fascinating. And here I'm going to bring it back to you. So the books themselves, the filmmakers just had the camera pointed straight down on a table, and the camera was pointed straight down. And they would set the book down. They would open the book up, and there was this hands, often with little white cotton gloves that we'd use like at a library, handling an old ancient book. And they would turn the page, and they would turn the page, and it was just page after page after page of these trippy, weird illustrations of, like people being cut into pieces, or people, with their head replaced with a giant sun image, or they were just, and it reminded me of the weirdest comic books you can imagine.
Yeah, like underground comics from like the late 60s. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, I agree with you.
When LSD was involved, in the late 60s, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I take issue with Jung's Jung tried to psychoanalyze alchemy, and there is a very strong dreamlike, surreal component, as you said. But I see those alchemical books as just all code. It's just all pictographic code. That the people who read those books or, exchanged those books understood what those illustrations meant. They understood like all the different components were descriptions of these processes, these chemical or obviously alchemical processes that they were undertaking. So I know how Jung felt about it. And I've been in this sort of reevaluation of Jung because I was super into Jung, and then I just kind of lost interest because a lot of it is because the way Jung was appropriated by like the New Age and so on. Now, again, I mean, he didn't crack it because he didn't understand, in my view, that he was looking at formula, that he was looking at literal formula expressed in this pictographic language. And I think you can't crack it that way. In my own experience, I don't know if you're familiar with the work that I've done with stellar symbolism and so on, but I went back and I looked at all the well-known Masonic symbolism, like the tracing boards and the master's blankets and so on. Mm-hmm. And I realized that it's all star maps. It's all aligns note for note. The alignments and the connections are so direct, right? That it's to me it's impossible to argue with. And people would make all these bizarre and contrived interpretations of this symbolism, and I understood it's all stellar. And also the Bible, and a lot of Egyptian myths, Egyptian art is all stellar. It's all maps. And why did they do that? Like, why did they do that? Why is there all this stellar symbolism in the Bible and Freemasonry and so on? In my view, it's because of the way that the ancients understood the soul's journey through the stars, that the heavens were the stars, and that the heavens above the heavens, as they call it, is the constellation Cepheus, and that is the garden. That's where we all want to return to, the Garden of Eden and so on. And that was seen in the Bible as like the heavens above the heavens. And it all has to do with how the ancient world understood. They believed that once the soul leaves the body, that it travels through the stars. And that's why there's all this ritualism attached to that. Now, that stuff was always mysterious to people. And when I look at it now, it's like it's so obvious. It's so self-evident. If we might one day discover a key to all this alchemical symbolism that will say, oh, okay, well, this is sulfur and this is aluminum and this is fire and this is water and, tincture of this and, whatever, camphor or something. I mean, whatever you choose to look at it as. But I really do honestly believe that the reason why Jung could never crack that is that it is just pictographic symbolism. Now, the thing is that it takes on a greater meaning when people like Jung start to look at that, because that symbolism is so potent and it's so resonant. And I think it really, it speaks to a lot of us because we have this dream reality vocabulary to draw upon.
Yeah.
And I think that that's why it's so potent. And that's what I think Jung was getting caught up in. And he should have, like I say, again, the non-overlapping magisteria, right? He should have split it in two, said, okay, this is clearly some sort of symbolic language that they were trying to keep secret, by the way. I mean, it is a true code, right? But it also, on the other level, these pictographs exist as visual images that have tremendous resonance for a lot of people, if not all of us. So,
and my sense is you're feeling the symbol unconsciously as an archetype rather than consciously as like a diagram or a chart in a scientific book.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up too in one way, because I think a lot about Jung and Campbell, Joseph Campbell, and the way that they sort of looked at the archetypes, in mythology and so on. Now, I think what happened is that sort of gave way to like neo-paganism, where it wasn't a roadmap to a certain reality. It was the reality itself. It's like, okay, we see all the symbolism, say, with Hermes and so on, and the Hermetic texts and the Emerald tablets and Hermes Trismegistus and so on and so forth. And, people just start to think, well, these are my new gods. It's like, are you my mother kind of mentality going on, when you should be looking at it as all these archetypes as signposts to a certain understanding of reality, and not like, gods to replace, your Christian upbringing with or whatever. And that's a problem that I've had for many, many years with like neo-paganism and so on. It's just like, no, Jung wasn't talking about like, well, I mean, it's sort of arguable because he got a little crazy with the Mithraic stuff. But, for the most part, they were trying to argue that these things are these kind of elusive, ephemeral descriptions of reality rather than their own reality. And that's kind of how I try to apply that to synchromysticism as well. It's like a lot of people, when they get into it, it's an occupational hazard in that regard. But like they start to think, well, this is like all about me and I'm the center of the universe and so on. And when you start to think that way, synchronicity will sort of react to that, okay? And it will lead you into dungeons of the mind. So that's another thing that I try to tell people to avoid as strenuously as possible.
The reason I asked the Jung on Alchemy question about the documentary is because on page 73 of your book, I'll just read this aloud, you wrote, "Symbol sorcery is in fact a form of sympathetic magic that ultimately seeks to create, manipulate, or cajole synchronicity to its own advantage."
Yes.
And that was like that helped me unlock this 4-part documentary that I found so impenetrable. Just that one sentence that you wrote was like, oh, that sums up that documentary really nicely.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, so here, let me just keep going. So in your book, you say, don't go into number synchronicities and don't dwell on that. And that's kind of a funny thing because you go to a UFO conference, and this is kind of my network, I guess. And you can just turn to someone, and you're sitting there, and you complete stranger sitting next to you at a UFO conference. You can just turn to them and say, "Hey, what's your number?" And they'll say, "Oh, my number's 333." And you turn to the other person on the other side, "Hey, what's your number?" And they'll say, "Oh, my number's 1111." And it's just this kind of thing. And I feel like I have my own number. If someone asked me, I would say 1234. And you are very cautious to avoid that. But at the same time, I'm going to say, you realize your book is 111 pages long, right?
It's actually, well, that's the text. That's the contents. It's actually 120 pages all told in the print book. But
okay.
Yeah, that was not intentional.
Okay.
When I was laying this book out, it's like working on a jigsaw puzzle backwards.
Oh, I know.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Writing a book is the easiest part of the process. It's the rest of it that drives me crazy.
Yeah. So here, let me praise your book a little bit. It's very conversational in its tone, and not only conversational, it's your conversation. It feels like it's your voice, like it's no question. It is your voice speaking plainly to me, the reader. And I zipped right through it. I raced right through it. It was fascinating. I went nutty with underlining stuff and highlighting things. And well, you know enough about me. I feel like I am uniquely positioned to understand a lot of this, some of it intuitively. And though I have never formally set out to have a synchromystical practice, I feel like I have informally done a lot of the things that are in the book. So it was very reassuring to me that I was not off path, let's say. I don't necessarily feel like I followed that path exactly, but I don't feel like I was lost in the woods or lost in the weeds, let's say. I was at times in my life, but I feel like presently I feel like I'm much more centered and with this. But I would highly recommend this book just because it is not intimidating. It's a short, sweet, little playful book.
But let me just say it's a reference book. It's not a book like the other books I've done where it's like it's about reading them and putting them on your shelf. This book is about reading it and putting it in your pocket and keeping it with you. So when you start to have these experiences and you start to face these problems that I lay out in the book methodically, you can consult with the information in this book and use it. It's a user's manual, more accurately, So like I called it the handbook because it is that's exactly what I want it to be, a handbook. It's a user's manual for synchromysticism. It's not me reading some sort of study on synchromysticism that I'm just going to shelve. I mean, this is a how-to.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's, this is much different. I mean, I've done a lot of books now, but this is the how-to book. This is not the reference book or whatever.
How do folks find the book?
On Amazon. Yeah, the almighty Amazon, the Lord and Master of all of our words and stories these days. I kind of want to get away from it, to be honest with you. I'd like to expand, but, we'll see how it goes. I mean, I don't know if you've been hearing about this, but Amazon, the Kindle, like unlimited programs, poor publishers, they just cannot catch their breath. Amazon is just pummeling them to death. So, I mean, this is another reason why I'm saying we got to get back to printed material. And I think a lot of authors and so on and so forth, if you can build your own platforms and develop your own audience and kind of not be as reliant on the almighty Amazon as we all are now, I think that would be a very healthy thing.
And that's tough. Yeah, it's tough. It's become a behemoth, and I'm beholden to it in a very real way. I'm self-publishing my books, and there's an enormous freedom in self-publishing. At the same time, you still got to do the hard work.
Well, I think print on demand is one of the greatest innovations of the past 100 years. Before, I mean, you probably had experience with this. You'd have to do a print run, X amount of books, and then you always just end up with whatever storage unit you have in your closet or your crawl space, your basement, your attic. You always end up with just boxes of unused, uncirculated books. And when you can just print according to the demand, that's a good thing. And when I really want to explore some of these other providers that will also sell through Amazon, but it's just like a more direct route to my readers and so on. I'll just tell you, I mean, real quickly, back in 2020, I published the first edition of the Endless American Midnight.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this beautiful layout, this beautiful cover that I ended up having to replace because it just printed like crap every single time. It was this very stark image, very kind of Blair Witch image on the cover of the original book. And I could never get it to print right. It just always looked like crap. And a lot of it was just... Amazon doesn't like when you order a lot of authors' copies. And I think they sort of kick your job downstairs to like the trash printer. But I actually had to redo the cover, so it had more color in it. And a lot of the problem that the cover I had was that it was a little bit more, I don't want to say monochrome, but it was very stark.
Oh, I remember that cover. Yeah. It was the image of almost the tree was lit up like a rune.
Yes, lit up like a rune. Yeah, that was in the end of my street there, by the way. This is a very strange, this area I'm in at night becomes much different in the nighttime than it does in the daytime. And I think that sort of reality, like I said, helped me repair myself after some very bad times, very, very bad times. So I wanted to commemorate that. But I actually think the new cover is much cooler. Kind of has like that John Carpenter look. You know, if people go online, you know, you can go online, go to Amazon, just look at the cover of The Endless American Midnight. It looks like a 70s horror poster, which is intentional. You know, very much intentional. But that was also taken right down the street too, that picture.
I had my run-in with Amazon when I did my book, Stories from the Messengers. The cover is just a close-up of an owl, and it has kind of a pale, bluey, green, gray, dark tone in these very vivid eyes. And wow, did it come back like black with just 2 yellow eyes in a bunch of the runs. And I had to monkey with the color to get it so it didn't turn into just nothingness.
You can't go subtle with them. You have to be like almost like a comic book.
Yeah. Which is, I wanted to be super subtle, but that didn't fly. Hey, just a little bit more here. Do you know Sharon Hewitt-Rowlett?
No.
She wrote a great big fat book, and I would suggest this to you. It's called The Source and Significance of Coincidences, a hard look at the astonishing evidence. And this is like I think it's over 500. It might be over 600 pages. I can't remember what it is now. And she explores synchronicity from every different angle she can. And a lot of it ends up dealing with like the big questions like God and the universe and all these things. And so she's has a PhD in philosophy, and it is not written as an academic book. It is very, very user-friendly and has so many stories. And that I really appreciate that, story after story. Anyway, I interviewed her on this new incarnation of the podcast here, and we were laughing and going back and forth, and we were talking about the big synchronicities, and I said something like, yeah, you know, like some synchronicities are so strong that it feels like getting hit by a lightning bolt from God. And she laughed and she said, yes, but that's exactly what a synchronicity is.
Well, maybe. I think that
she said it playfully, but yeah.
Yeah, you have to be real careful with that, though. You got to be really careful, because that's when you start to get into like almost like a Jerusalem syndrome kind of mentality.
She was playful how she was saying it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too and one of the reasons why I didn't put a lot of stories in is I think too many synchronicity stories can get a little numbing for me.
Synchronicities are so intensely personal. It's like listening to someone's dream.
Yes, exactly. So I did talk about that experience that I had in September 1993, which it seems like the rest of my life was sort of set in stone. And I talked about those synchronicities, but I didn't. Listen, I could have done a 500-page book on them, but I didn't. Because, again, I want this to be a book that people carry with them wherever they go. You know, it's very, it's a very small book. It's not a huge read, but it's not meant to be a huge read. It is meant to be, this is a manual. So I might be asking too much, but I would like people to just, you know, even if they just get the Kindle version or whatever, just have it at hand. Because believe me, you are going to get, once you start to notice synchronicity, it starts to notice you, okay? And it's going to start playing with you. And sometimes it's going to kind of torment you, all right? And you have to be able to sort all that stuff out. You need all the tools I tried to provide people with.
Well, you did more than try. You achieved it, in my opinion.
Oh, thank you. But, you know, when I break things down, you know, what is the significance here? I think that's very important, because a lot of people end up doing what I call chasing guppies, where it's like every tiny little synchronicity they have to catch and tell everybody about. when sometimes those are just almost like the ripples. Those are just the ripples in the pond when you throw the big boulder in the middle, and you'll drive yourself mad. You will literally drive yourself mad. I've seen it happen, chasing all those little guppies. Let them go. A lot of what I'm talking about in this book is like letting go and just holding on to the things that really blow your mind. And like I say in the book, don't try to explain it to people. People are going to go, what is this about? Like, how does this work? Like, how is this happening? It's just like, don't try to explain that. Don't defend either. Don't try to defend it. Don't try to apologize or defend or explain. Just hit people with your findings and walk away and let them handle it. What does it mean to them? A lot of times when people try to fall into the trap of explaining or, trying to answer people's questions, they end up being like a little mouse that a bunch of kittens are sort of batting around, Don't put yourself in that position, or maintain your sense of authority.
As I proceeded forward in this work, there came a point when I was going crazy. It's in my blog. You can go look at my blog from around 2009 through 2012 or so. I'm teetering on the edge of madness, which is a wonderful document in a way. There's like a kind of a power to that madness at times, but it's not healthy. And I formally decided I could no longer be astonished. That wasn't serving me, but I could be in awe. Like awe is a different vocabulary word than astonished. I could be in awe. That's something else, right? Like you can be in awe of a beautiful sunset.
I don't think you have any control over being astonished. I'm astonished, dude. I'm astonished all the time. I tell people I've never lost that holy crap kind of reaction. I'm not jaded. Oddly enough, I would argue that I've done more synchromystic work than anybody has, at least for the past several years. A lot of it is done on private blogs with private groups and so on. The Secret Sun blog is kind of the tip of the iceberg. But I never have lost that sense of like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. Holy crap, what the hell? I haven't lost that. And that's, like I said, that's how you know it's real.
And for me, that sense of awe is healthier for me. And I just needed to live. I was getting hit hard, fast and furious. I still am. And with synchronicities. And I just feel like I'm a healthier person if I remain in awe of this playful trickster event rather than like astonishment was like, it felt like my adrenal glands were getting all frazzled by so much astonishment. Like it was like, astonishment might not be the right word, but it was frenetic. Like it was a frenetic, frantic trap for me for a while. And I'm much more peaceful with the mindset I have of being in awe. It is reflecting back at me more, awesome. I guess that awe, that's right there, the word awesome. Like it's reflecting back awesome synchronicities as opposed to unsettling, disrupting synchronicities.
Well, God bless. I wish I could say that, but...
and I know what it means to have the big ones too, so...
Yeah. I have not lost that. I've not become jaded. I've not become desensitized to it. If anything, it's the opposite, And so the work that I've done on like the public work that I've done on the Secret Sun that people can see, at least for the past 5 years, is, it's probably been about 10 to 15% of the actual synchromystic work that I've been doing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I think that's about right, 10 to 15%. A lot of it is, stuff that is not really appropriate for public consumption, just for my private groups and so on, people on my Patreon and everything. But, what happens, my sinuses start to swell when I get a scent it's funny because it is almost like, a reaction, physical reaction. But when my sinuses start to swell, that's my spidey sense telling me that, yeah, you're about to get your mind blown open again. So, and that has not diminished at all. Again, I mean, I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but it's just the way it is.
No, I'm not saying. Yes, I'm right there with you. But it's just, I feel like for my own sanity, I had to, and I'm not jaded. That's not the right way to say it, but I'm appreciating them, and I'm using it in my life to, like, I'm pulling on that thread. That thread has laid itself before me, and I'm pulling on that thread, and I'm not letting go.
Well, hopefully people can get to a space with their synchromistic work where it can help them make decisions. Because when we come to impasses in our lives, or forks in the road, or whatever, oftentimes there are signs. Okay? There are signposts for that fork in the road telling you which direction to go in. Unfortunately, we don't always know how to read those signposts. I'm hoping that if people understand synchronistism, that they will start to be able to recognize when those things pop up. And believe me, I mean, that's something that I've drawn upon for a long time. And I would have to really be hard pressed to tell you if it's steered me wrong. I can't think of an example. I mean, I can tell you, maybe think of examples when it was pointing me to an outcome that I would have preferred another outcome. So let's just say, but the signs are clear if you learn how to read them. Mm-hmm. And I think this can help people, but you have to be very, very, very careful, and you have to have a tremendous amount of confidence in the work that you're doing. Otherwise, again, I mean, the thing that I am really, really battling against with this book is that drowning feeling that people get,
which I have been through.
Yes, you've been. Everybody goes through it, Mike. Everybody who does this work experiences that. I mean, I experienced that myself, and it was. I mean, this was really before I started doing the Secret Sun, but it was. Everybody just thought, "Oh my God, he's gone insane! Like, he's literally gone insane," and it wasn't that I went insane. It's just that I was tapping into a current of reality that is insane. I don't know, maybe that's what it is. It's just that the evidence was all there, but whether or not that was evidence that I should be pursuing becomes the question. And again, if you start to think it's all about you, you have to stop and reevaluate. Because really what you want to do is, it's not about you, but you are a part of it. That you're about it. It's not about you, you're about it. So it's sort of reversing a lot of the preconceptions that we've been programmed with, by consumer culture and so on.
Yeah. Great. This has been a joy. Thank you so much. I'm not sure exactly how many times I have interviewed you. I bet you it's up to 7.
A lot,
but this has been great, and we haven't done it for years. And I keep on going back to you as a sort of touchstone in my own journey. I guess there's a new age term for you. So, but I have to thank you for having a playful way to frame all this stuff that I've been through, in a playful way in this book in particular.
Well, thank you. And I would just caution any of your listeners not to go back and listen to some our old discussions, because my brains weren't working a lot of times. There were a couple interviews that we did 2012 or so, and my synapses were just not firing. Anyhow, so don't listen. Nope, everybody's going to want to go back to listen out of morbid curiosity.
There's a couple of gems there. Let me tell you, there's some gems in those too. So
we always had good discussions, but I just remember there was a couple interviews or a couple discussions that we did where I went back and I just wince thinking about it. It's like, oh God, I couldn't talk at all.
And that's why I edit my own podcasts so I can sound, because I'm the worst at not finishing a sentence, and I can clean it up in the editing process.
Yeah, I'm Mr. Parenthetical. My mind is always, I can't make a statement without like a sidebar because my brain is always like going off on all these different roads.
Any good conversation is like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a struggle to stay on that one train of thought that I'm trying to express.
But that's the joy of the conversation.
Yes, I believe so. I believe that is true.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, always a pleasure. My door is always open to you, sir.
Great, and my door has an owl and aliens on it, and it's always open to you too. So
how could it not?
Yeah.
How could it not?
Okay, thanks so much.
All righty.
This is Mike chiming in after the editing. A few things I want to share here at the end. During the interview, I also talked about a documentary, and it is titled C.G. Jung on Alchemy. And this is a 4-part documentary, and I said they were about a half hour long each episode. I'm incorrect. They were fully 1 hour long each episode. And wow, is this a dense and strange documentary. This came out in 2024, so this year, and I'll just read the description that's on the Amazon Prime page. Uncover the secrets of alchemy and psychology. Explore the private rare book collection of Carl Gustav Jung and his personal handwritten excerpts. Filmed at the house of C.G. Jung, Eranos, and other mystic places in Switzerland. That doesn't say a lot, but wow, is this a weird documentary. Each episode, one is titled Earth, the next is titled Air, then Fire, then Water. And I'm not really sure if I can recommend this documentary or not. It's kind of almost too weird. I certainly loved it. I want to be cautious to be pretty clear about what you're getting into if you want to try to dig into this documentary. One more thing of note for Patreon members, Chris and I kept the microphone going, and we gabbed for about another 40 minutes. Like, we really went at it, and we were talking about movies and art and all kinds of stuff, comic books, and almost nothing about the more mystical aspects that we were talking about during the interview itself. I'm glad I recorded it. It's a nice conversation. I'm going to put it on the Patreon page for the members. Whether you enjoy it or not, I'm not so sure, but it'll give you a good insight into both Chris and I and our quirky ways. And my final message here is to highly recommend Chris's book, The Secret Sun Synchromystic Handbook. It's a short little book, and it fits in your pocket. Peace and strength, and thank you so much. Bye now.